Sunday night, I met a friend at LA's premier blues jam. Later, we went back to her place and talked till midnight about the perfect storm insanity of 2020, about the state of the country and where the hell we're all headed. Conversation turned to Donald Trump and what are likely to be his lasting contributions to American life. She and I are both conservatives, but we interact a lot with liberals. So we have a pretty good lens on what cultural shifts have resulted from the 4 exciting, infuriating, inspiring, and unforgettable years of the presidency of Donald J. Trump. The next morning I boiled it down. Here's my 7 ways Trump changed us forever. Number 1, the fake news. Everybody knew long before 2016 that most journalists were liberals. Still, people thought mainstream sources at least tried to be impartial. But something about Donald Trump catalyzed their inner activist selves, and pretty soon all pretense of objectivity fell away. In 2016, MSNBC was perceived as the cable news source that was biased left as much as Fox News was biased right. But by, say, 2018, CNN just said screw it and became an openly anti-Trump network. The New York Times as well. The real journalists on staff chafed at being forced to write everything with a built-in slant, and they started leaving. Platforms like Substack emerged and filled up with people who wanted to report the story, not the narrative. Now I get most of my news in email newsletters from reporters I trust to tell me the facts rather than trying to sway me. It's all out in the open now, whether liberal or conservative. No thinking person believes that a population hearing only biased news can be trusted to govern itself. This leads us to number 2, the podcast universe. During the Trump years, smart people realized that mainstream news was incomplete at best and straight-up propaganda at worst. This sent us looking for in-depth discussions of the issues. The online forum pioneered by Joe Rogan absolutely exploded. As the legacy news outfits, both printed and televised, became the emperors with no clothes, a new intellectual class emerged on podcasts. Hatred of Donald Trump had sent a frenzied energy into the expanding world of wokeness. This put heavyweight thinkers like Jordan Peterson, the Weinstein brothers, Sam Harris, and many others under constant fire. They realized the hard way what many of us had known for years. Free speech was under attack from the left. This sent them to Rogan's show, where hours-long conversations about damn near everything gave birth to a sort of club called the intellectual dark web. They disagree very regularly, but their identity as objective thinkers trumps their political affiliations. Peterson, who leans to the right, enjoys exactly the same level of respect as Sam Harris, who openly leans left. When you hear these guys and many others digging into ideas, limited party doctrines seem like bumper sticker slogans by comparison. You listen and you don't root for your guy to win, you root for the truth to come out. Trump woke us up to the fake news, and a whole new way of holding good faith conversations arrived to give us the real news. Number 3, no-nonsense governance. How many times was I driving to work in the morning when I heard of something that Trump had done or said that just made me laugh out loud with surprise? He'd call BS on some status quo idea that we'd held since we were children, or he'd flatly reject some new thing we'd been conned into accepting. Political correctness be damned, it was all a blast of fresh air. Of course NATO should be carrying their own weight. Of course the Paris Climate Accords were toothless posturing ignored by the worst offenders. Of course the responsibility to fight Islamic terror belonged to Islamic nations enriched by the oil industry America helped them build and had protected ever since. Of course you hold back on bombing innocent workers at an airfield in response to a drone attack on a Saudi oil field, but rain hellfire when you spot Iran's chief of terror in a motorcade with his top henchman. Of course you strive for U.S. energy independence. And when your country has been in a trade war with the fastest-growing economic power on Earth for at least a decade, you step up, call it what it is, and start sending some of the hurt back the way it came. Which brings us to number 4, China. Nobody, and I do mean nobody, is asleep about China here in the summer of 2021. That is completely to the credit of Donald Trump. Since the earliest days of his campaign, Trump has been sounding this alarm. China has been gutting our industrial strength, stealing our intellectual property, and building infrastructure throughout Asia and beyond that leaves dozens of small countries in debt to a communist regime, all while casually defying international standards of human rights. We've been in an ideological Cold War with China for many years, and nobody seemed able to admit it. But now it's so obvious that even the left gets it. I'll get into this more in my upcoming China series. Number 5, pandemic readiness. Look, had 2020 not been an election year, and had we not had a president hated furiously by Democrats, we would never have gone into a grand mal seizure over COVID-19. If Clinton had won in 2016, the powers that be would have clamped a lid on the info, controlled the narrative on all fronts, and tweaked the stats in order to minimize fear and economic damage. This in the interest of retaining power in November 2020. We'd never have had massive lockdowns that produced millions of pent-up young people. Protests and riots would therefore not have racked the country for months. We'd now not be adding trillions to the national debt in order to bail out an economy needlessly crippled. Trump's shoot-from-the-hip style kept the left so off balance that their overreach became manic and their manipulations became obvious. But in spite of censorship, a lot of ideas did manage to get discussed in detail. The U.S. population is a hell of a lot more knowledgeable about viruses than we were before. COVID-19 was never an existential threat to mankind. It ignores the young and healthy and does little more than speed the clock for those already scheduled to die. But that won't always be the case. When some new virus shows up that goes through the young and productive like the Grim Reaper on steroids, we're going to be grateful that we had this dry run. Pandemic readiness will be a feature of both major party platforms going forward, and not just at the federal level. Neither side will ever want to get caught off guard by a new bug. And smart politicians from here on out will be looking to assure voters that we'll never have to guess about what medical information is accurate. And this brings us to number 6. Big tech controls our information. This new reality was exposed almost daily during the pandemic. Everybody had the experience of watching a video that challenged the CDC WHO narrative only to see it disappear. In 2020, it became obvious that anonymous, unelected community guideline officers are controlling what we are allowed to know. Beyond that, the algorithms built by these same tech giants are manipulating what we want to know. We are simultaneously being sent down rabbit holes and being denied real info that we're seeking out. We know this now. The honest among us now admit that some of what we think we know is flat-out bullshit. And almost all of what we're sure we know is based on information tailored to our biases in order to keep us in oppositional camps. Because that produces more clicks and longer engagement. This enables algorithms to understand us as consumers and target us precisely. And these behavioral profiles are then sold in job lots to the highest bidder. Because of the disruptive energy surrounding Donald Trump like an aura, all of the things here listed are now in our minds forever. And there is one other thing. Number 7, no political party will ever dare to ignore working-class Americans again. Trump's primary focus through thick and thin was on blue-collar Americans. He bonded with us largely through the lens of illegal immigration and the massive impact that had on our wages. Democrats had once built their party by engaging with workers across the Rust Belt and the rural South, through unions and work safety legislation and just noticing and appreciating the American worker. But their focus shifted to universities. Fast-changing social philosophies attached themselves to students who carried them forth into the professions. Over time, the Democratic Party became what they had always accused the GOP of being. It became the party of rich elites who looked down their noses at trade workers. Oddly, what has finally awakened Democrats to the value of those who shower after work is their own defense of illegal immigration. Before Trump came along, they just hired the cheapest labor available, and their closest encounter with physical work was a busboy or the sound of a leaf blower beyond the plantation shutters and the double-paned glass. Then Trump said, "Let's build a wall," And political tribalism required Democrats to choose illegal immigrants over American wage workers who could no longer make a living in their trades. But these liberals began to look around, and what they saw was no white people and no black people on any construction site. This surprised them. But what they also saw was hard, dangerous work being performed everywhere else by men and women of every color who were not only skilled and hardworking, but also often courageous. During the pandemic, every bare grocery store shelf was filled again in short order. That pointed directly at people who get up every morning and get the job done. As wokeness falls apart under the weight of its own silliness, Democrats are beginning to miss their status as the party of labor. They're forced to realize that they only won in 2020 because of their propaganda partnerships with legacy media and big tech, both of which were exposed during Trump's presidency, neither of which will ever be so powerful again. Biden won by a squeaker, really, and largely because he was the only Democratic candidate who had any association at all with the American worker. Smart liberals know what smart conservatives know, that as soon as Republicans process through the current cast of Trump wannabes and field a candidate who speaks to American workers in a voice of authenticity and common sense, but without Donald Trump's provocative showmanship, American workers will once again unite as they did in 2016. Only next time, with a candidate who gets the messaging right, the American working class vote will include large portions of the Hispanic vote and the African American vote. And then we're going to see a wild scramble back from the land of BLM football and woke Coke to an America that looks an awful lot like home. Thanks for listening to my 7 ways that Trump changed us forever. I hope you'll share it and subscribe to this channel, and I invite you to add to this list in the comments below. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, subscribe to our channel and then click the little bell to get notifications.